Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story so quiet it feels like it's holding its breath. Set deep in the frozen American West, where snow buries secrets and the wind remembers every betrayal. It's a place where love and exile share the same roof, and one choice can cost a man his land, his name, and everything he's built. It began with something small. A handful of flour thrown by accident, but it was enough to crack open a silence that had stood for years. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The cold came early that year, settling over Shadowhawk Horse Ranch like a wet blanket pressed against the skin. Dawn light barely cut through the frost on the corral rails when Ju stepped out from the main house, breath clouding white in the still air. The horses shifted in their stalls, hooves scraping dry straw, but no wind moved the pines. No birds called from the ridge. The world had gone quiet in a way that made the ears ring. He walked the length of the corral, gloved hand trailing along the rough pine poles, checking latches, counting heads. The geldings lifted their muzzles, nostrils flaring at his scent, then dropped them again. Familiar. Safe. For now. Inside the kitchen, Ellie Boone moved like someone afraid the floorboards might give way. Vera Kane had left her with a list scratched on brown paper. Cornbread by sunup, coffee strong enough to wake the dead, keep the stove fed. Ellie tied the apron strings with trembling fingers and reached for the flour barrel. The scoop sank deep. She lifted it, arms shaking just enough that white dust sifted onto her wrists. Ju pushed the door open without sound. The hinges never creaked under his weight. He filled the frame, buckskin coat still stiff with night frost, dark eyes sweeping the room out of habit. Ellie turned at the faint draft. Saw him. Gasped. The scoop flew up. Flour exploded outward in a thick white cloud, coating his face, clinging to eyelashes, settling on the bridge of his nose like fresh snow on dark stone. Time stopped. The only sound was the soft patter of powder drifting to the floorboards. Ellie froze, scoop trembling in her grip, eyes wide with the old terror of being caught wrong. She waited for the shout, the curse, the order to pack and leave before the sun cleared the ridge. Her heart hammered so hard she tasted iron. Ju did not move, did not blink away the flour. He stood there, broad shoulders blocking the doorway light, a ghost of white over dark skin and darker hair. Slowly, one gloved hand rose. He brushed a streak from his cheek, the motion deliberate, unhurried. The powder fell in a fine veil. Ellie squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, he was still looking at her. Not angry, not amused, just looking, as though measuring something only he could see. The silence stretched, long, heavy, the kind that presses on the chest until breathing hurts. Finally, Ju spoke, low, rough, the voice of a man who did not waste words. Welcome here. He said it without inflection, without warmth or chill. Just fact. Like naming the color of the sky. Ellie stared. Her throat worked, but no sound came. The scoop slipped from her fingers, clattered against the counter. Ju turned away first. He stepped back into the yard, boots crunching frost. The door closed behind him, with a soft thud. Ellie stood alone in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron like ash. The stove popped. Coffee began to boil, bitter steam curling up. Outside, the horses nickered once, then fell quiet again. Ju walked to the corral rail and leaned against it, arms folded. The flour still clung to his face in patches. He did not wipe it away. He simply stood, watching the ridge where the sun would soon rise, feeling the land breathe beneath his boots. The quiet had returned, but it was different now. Thicker, as though something had been disturbed under the surface, something buried long enough to be forgotten, but not long enough to die. He tasted the flour on his lips, chalky, foreign, and somewhere deep, where memory lives without words, he felt the first small crack in the wall he had built around this place. The ranch had been his alone, controlled, ordered. Now, a woman stood inside it, clumsy and marked by misfortune, and the land had noticed. Ellie remained in the kitchen, hands pressed flat to the table to stop their shaking. She looked at the empty doorway, then at the flour barrel, then back again. The coffee hissed over the rim. She did not move to save it. Outside, Ju stayed at the rail until the sun finally broke the ridge, thin gold light cutting across the snow-dusted pastures. He breathed once, deep, the cold burning his lungs. Then he turned toward the barn. The day had begun. But the silence between them had not ended. It had only grown heavier. The Christmas market in Willow Creek had come alive under a sky the color of old tin. Wagons creaked over frozen ruts. Harness bells jingled sharp against the low murmur of voices, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mixed with wet wool and pine smoke hung thick in the air. Snow lay thin on the ground, trampled to gray mud in the center of the square, but out at the edges, where Ellie Boone had set her barrel, it stayed white and untouched. She had arrived before first light, breath fogging as she arranged the jars of spiced apple jam and the small grass-woven baskets of dried berries. Her fingers, red from the cold, tied a last strip of red cloth around one basket, then fell still. She kept her head down, shawl pulled tight, hoping the wind would carry away the whispers before they reached her. They didn't. Two ranch wives, Maud and Lila, passed close enough for their skirts to brush the barrel. Maud paused, glanced at the neat rows of jars, then at Ellie's face. Her mouth tightened. She tugged Lila's arm and muttered, loud enough to carry, "Best leave those be. Bad hands make bad food." Ellie's cheeks burned beneath the cold. She lowered her eyes to the snow at her boots, fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. A boy, young Cal, kicked a spray of dirty slush toward the barrel as he went by. It splashed her hem dark. She did not look up. Further off, Buck Rawls stood with arms crossed, cigar clamped between his teeth, smoke curling from the corner of his mouth. He watched her the way a man watches something he already knows is worthless. Ellie told herself to breathe. Just sell one jar, just one. Enough for flour through January. The black harness bells of the Shadowhawk wagon cut through the dull roar. Vera Kane stepped down first, red coat bright against the gray day, blonde hair pinned perfect. She smiled at faces she knew, hand lingering on the wagon side as Ju descended. He moved slow, deliberate, long buckskin coat brushing the snow. Stetson low. His eyes swept the square, not hurried, not searching, just reading. Past the mayor tipping his hat, past the blacksmith calling out, until they settled on the far corner, on the woman in the faded shawl, standing alone by a barrel. Vera followed his gaze. Her smile froze. Ju started walking. Long strides eating distance. Vera's voice trailed after him. "We ought to check the dry goods first." But he did not turn. Ellie was wrestling with a jar that had tipped on the uneven wood when his shadow fell across her display. She startled, hands fumbling, nearly knocking the whole crate into the mud. She caught the edge, breath catching hard. She looked up. Ju stood there, unmoving, eyes on the small baskets and jars. The market noise seemed to thin around them. People watched. Vera caught up, breathless. "Ju, really? We have business to—" He ignored her. One gloved hand reached out, lifted a grass-woven basket with dried berries and a tiny stitched ornament. He held it like something fragile. "How much?" Ellie blinked. Her voice came small, cracked from disuse. 50 cents, sir." Buck Rawls wandered over, arms still crossed, cigar smoldering. He barked a laugh. 50 cents? You're getting robbed, mister. That cursed sugar water ain't worth a rusty dime." Ju did not turn. His eyes stayed on Buck's face, steady, unblinking. The silence between them grew thick enough to taste. Slowly, Ju reached inside his coat, pulled out a leather money clip, peeled off a crisp $5 bill, laid it flat on the barrel. The sound was soft, but it carried. Buck stared, jaw slack. "What in hell?" Joe peeled off another $5, laid it on top. The crowd drew closer. A low murmur rose. Buck's face purpled. "If you're throwing money away to make a point, I'll give 6 just to smash it." Joe did not flinch. Another bill. 10 now. Gasps rippled outward. Buck choked. 20. Ju laid 2 20s and a 10. $50 on the barrel for one small jar of apple jam. Buck's eyes bulged. He looked at the money, at Ju's calm face, at the crowd now silent and staring. Then he spun on his heel and shoved through the people, muttering curses that faded into the wind. Vera stood rooted, knuckles white on her coat. Her eyes burned holes into Ellie's back. Joe picked up the jar, held it in his big gloved hand a moment, then looked down at Ellie. Her face was pale, eyes wide with something between shock and fear. "Keep the change," he said quietly. He tipped his hat, just once, then turned and walked away, the small jar cradled like something precious. The market stayed quiet long after he left. Ellie stared at the stack of bills on the barrel. Her hands shook so hard she could not touch them at first. When she finally did, the paper felt cold against her skin. Across the square, Vera Kane watched him go. Her breath came short. Something hard settled in her eyes. The wind picked up then, carrying the smell of pine and smoke and distant horses. It moved the red cloth on Ellie's basket, fluttering like a warning. Ju reached the wagon. He set the jar carefully on the seat beside him. Did not look back. But the land had seen, and the whispers had begun to travel. The night came down hard on Shadowhawk Horse Ranch, the kind of dark that swallowed sound before it could travel far. Snow had stopped falling, but the air stayed thick with cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Inside the main house, the stove popped low, sending faint orange light under the kitchen door. Ellie Boone stood just inside it. Back pressed to the rough pine wall, hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. She had come for a last cup of coffee, something to steady her after the market, but voices stopped her cold. In the bunkhouse across the yard, lamplight leaked yellow through cracks in the plank walls. Vera Kane had walked out there after supper, red coat buttoned high, breath fogging white. She spoke low to Kid Harlan first, the boy who carried feed and messages, and then to the rest of the crew. Tuck and Rafe and the others sat on bunks, boots off, listening. Ellie could not hear every word. The wind took most of them, but pieces drifted through the dark like smoke. "Taking advantage. That widow's got him twisted," Poor judgment for a man like Ju. Vera's voice stayed soft, almost kind, the way poison can sound when it's poured slow. She poured coffee for the men as she talked, cup clinking against tin, steam rising in thin curls. Kid Harlan nodded once, eyes on the floor. Tuck rubbed his jaw, said nothing. The others shifted, leather creaking under them. Ellie's breath came shallow. She pressed her palm flat to the doorframe, wood cool and splinter rough against skin. The market money still sat folded in her apron pocket, heavy, wrong somehow. $50 for jam nobody else would touch. Now the whispers had followed it home. Out in the yard, Ju moved between the corral and the barn, checking gates one last time. His boots left shallow prints in the new snow. He did not look toward the bunkhouse. Did not need to. The lamp glow and the low voices carried on the still air. He knew. He stopped at the water trough, broke the thin skin of ice with his boot heel. The crack sounded loud in the quiet. Water seeped black under the fracture. He crouched, dipped a gloved hand, let the cold run through his fingers. The motion was slow. Necessary. Inside his chest, something tightened. Not anger, not yet. Just the old knowledge that words, once spoken, could not be called back. Words had taken land before, taken lives, taken names. He had built this place to stand apart from that. Quiet. Ordered. His. Now the crew listened to Vera. Not because they hated him, because doubt was easier than trust when winter pressed close and feed ran low. Ellie eased the kitchen door open a crack. Cold rushed in, carrying the smell of pine smoke and horse sweat from the yard. She watched Ju rise from the trough, shake water from his glove, stand motionless a long moment. His silhouette against the snow looked carved from the same dark as the pines. He turned then, not toward the bunkhouse, toward the main house. His eyes found the thin stripe of light under the kitchen door. Held. Ellie stepped back, heart knocking against ribs. She let the door close without sound. In the bunkhouse, Vera finished speaking. She set the coffee pot down with a soft clank. "Just thought you boys ought to know," she said, "before things get worse." Tuck cleared his throat. "He's always been square with us." Vera smiled thin. "Of course he has. Until now." She left them there, coat rustling as she crossed the yard. Her boots crunched past the kitchen window. Ellie stayed in shadow, unseen. Ju waited until Vera's shape disappeared into the main house. Then he walked to the barn door, pushed it open. Hay scent rolled out, warm and dry against the cold. He stepped inside, pulled the door shut behind him. The horses shifted, nickering low. He moved down the aisle, hand trailing stall rails, checking legs, listening to breathing. Routine. Anchor. But his steps slowed near the far end. He crouched again, eyes on the straw. A boot print, not his, pressed deep near the haystack. Fresh. Too fresh. He touched it with a fingertip. The straw gave under pressure. Someone had stood here, not long ago. Joe rose, stood still in the dim. The lantern on the wall threw long shadows across the rafters. He did not call out, did not curse. He simply breathed once, deep, tasting the hay and the cold and the faint trace of cheap whiskey that lingered on the air. Outside, the night held its breath. In the kitchen, Ellie poured coffee she no longer wanted. Her hands shook enough that it sloshed over the rim, dark against the tin cup. She set the pot down hard. The sound echoed small in the empty room. Across the yard, in the barn's deep shadow, Ju remained motionless, The strange boot print stayed under his boot, unerased, and somewhere in the dark between bunkhouse and barn, a decision waited. Unspoken, unmade, but already heavier than snow. The wind rose then, soft at first, then sharper. It carried the smell of distant wood smoke and something else, something restless, coming closer. The afternoon light bled thin and gray across the high plateau, the sun already dropping behind the ridge like a spent cartridge. Snow began again, fat flakes drifting slow at first, then thickening until the world narrowed to white and shadow. Ellie Boone pulled her shawl tighter and walked the path to the barn, boots crunching through fresh powder. The foal had come early that week, weak in the hind leg, and she carried the heavy wooden snow shovel balanced on one shoulder, using the blade to scrape a narrow track through the drift piled against the big doors. Inside, the barn held warmth trapped in hay and horsehide. The smell of dry straw and warm manure rose thick, comforting in the way only familiar dirt could be. She leaned the shovel against a stall post, wood clunking soft against wood, and knelt in the loose bedding. The foal nickered low, nosing her palm. She ran fingers down the thin leg, feeling for heat, for swelling. Her breath came steady now, the market whispers pushed back by the simple work of hands-on animal. She did not hear the door ease open behind her. Rafe Slade stepped in quiet, coat dusted white, breath sour with whiskey and the cold. Vera's coins still weighed in his pocket, enough for a bottle and a night's forgetting. He stayed in the shadow of the haystack, watching her bent back, the way her shoulders moved careful over the foal. The rumors Vera had fed him sat easy in his mouth. The widow who'd charmed the Apache, the one who'd bring trouble down on them all. He took a step. Straw crackled under his boot. Ellie stiffened. Her hand paused on the foal's leg. She did not turn right away. The barn felt smaller suddenly, the rafters lower, the air heavier with something besides hay dust. Rafe moved closer. "Evening, ma'am." His voice rolled low, thick. He stopped just behind her, close enough she could smell the liquor on him, the stale sweat under his coat. Ellie rose slow, knees popping, back straight as she could make it. She kept her eyes on the foal a moment longer, then turned. Her face stayed blank, but her pulse hammered in her throat. "I don't know you," she said. Quiet. Steady enough. Rafe grinned, teeth stained. "Heard you're mighty friendly with the Apache fella. Figured maybe you'd be friendly with me, too." He took another step. The space between them shrank to nothing. His hand lifted, slow, toward her shoulder. Ellie's breath caught. The old fear rose fast. Fear of hands, of being cornered, of the world proving once more she carried misfortune like a brand. She could stay still. Swallow it. Let him talk himself out or walk away. She had done it before. Survived by disappearing. But the foal shifted behind her, small hooves scraping straw. The barn smelled of life, of things depending on her not vanishing. Her eyes flicked to the shovel. Leaning right there, handle worn smooth by years of use. Rafe's fingers brushed her shawl. Something snapped inside her. Not anger, not courage, just the raw need to keep breathing, to keep standing. She reached. Fingers closed around the thick ash handle. Eyes squeezed shut. A small, terrified sound escaped her throat. Half squeak, half breath. She swung. The flat of the blade caught him square on the temple. A dull thwack echoed up into the rafters, sharp and final. Rafe's eyes rolled white. His knees buckled like cut strings. He dropped face first into the straw, out cold, a red welt already blooming under the skin. The shovel slipped from Ellie's hands. It thudded soft beside him. She stood there, chest heaving, staring down at what she had done. Her arms shook. The barn spun slow. Outside, boots crunched through snow. Deliberate, unhurried. The big doors swung open. Cold air rushed in, carrying flakes that danced in the lantern glow. Ju filled the frame, coat open, eyes dark under the brim of his hat. He had seen the strange tracks leading from the bunkhouse, followed them without hurry, without question. He stepped inside. Stopped. The scene held still. Rafe snoring softly into the straw, shovel lying crooked, Ellie standing over him with wide eyes and trembling hands. Ju looked at the man, looked at the shovel-shaped mark on his temple, looked at Ellie. Silence stretched long enough to hurt. Then something moved in his chest, deep, unexpected. The corners of his eyes creased. His broad shoulders hitched once. A low sound started in his throat, rose, broke free. He laughed. Not loud at first. A rumble, rough and real, filling the barn like sudden thunder. The horses tossed heads, startled. Ju threw his head back, the sound rolling out pure and unguarded, the laugh of a man who had carried stone too long and suddenly found it cracked open. Ellie blinked. Stared. The terror drained from her face, replaced by something stunned, almost soft. Ju stepped forward, stepped over Rafe without looking down. He stopped in front of her, close enough she could smell pine smoke on his coat. Leather, the faint metallic edge of snow. He looked down at her, still smiling, just the ghost of it now, warm in his eyes. The wind howled soft outside the doors. Neither spoke, but the barn felt different. Smaller, warmer, and heavier with what had just changed. In the far corner, a shadow shifted. Old man Cochise, half hidden by the hay, watching without a word. He had come for the foal's leg, same as Ellie. He stayed still, saw everything. Then he turned away, silent as smoke, and slipped back into the falling snow. The doors stood open behind Ju. Flakes swirled in. Something waited out there in the dark, unspoken, but already moving closer. The kitchen lamp burned low, wick guttering in its glass chimney, throwing long shadows across the scarred pine table. Snow tapped soft against the window panes, a steady, patient rhythm like fingers drumming on a coffin lid. Ellie Boone sat on one side of the table, hands wrapped around a tin cup gone cold long ago. Coffee had congealed at the bottom, black and bitter. She stared into it without seeing. Across from her, Ju sat straight-backed on the rawhide chair, elbows on the table, fingers laced. His coat hung open, still carrying the barn's hay scent and the faint metallic bite of snow. He had not spoken since they left the barn. Neither had she. The stove popped once, sending a spark up the flue. The only other sound was the wind sliding under the eaves, low and restless. Ellie's eyes flicked to the door, then back to her cup. The shovel's weight lingered in her arms, a dull ache. She had washed her hands twice at the pump outside, scrubbing until the skin turned raw, but she could still feel the ash handle, the sickening thud when it connected. Not pride, not shame, just the knowledge that something had shifted inside her. Something small and final. Joe watched her without staring. His gaze moved slow, her trembling fingers, the flour still dusting the hem of her apron from that first morning, the way her shoulders stayed tight even now. He had laughed in the barn, once, raw and unexpected, but the sound had died quick. Now the quiet between them felt heavier, like wet wool settling on skin. Outside, hoofbeats had come and gone earlier, Kid Harlan riding out to Widow Greer's place with a message, or maybe just to talk. The crew had stayed in the bunkhouse longer than usual tonight, voices low through the walls. Tuck had come to the kitchen door once, hat in hand, asked if Jew needed anything. Jew had shaken his head. Tuck lingered a second too long, eyes sliding to Ellie, then left without another word. The whispers were spreading. Not loud, not yet, but steady, like roots working under frost. Ellie lifted the cup, set it down again without drinking. The tin rang soft against wood. Jew exhaled once, slow, controlled. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the small jar of apple jam from the market, set it between them. The glass caught the lamp's orange glow, amber light pooling on the table like spilled honey. Neither touched it. The silence stretched until it hurt. Ellie's throat worked. She looked up at him. Really looked. His face stayed still, but his eyes held something new. Not pity, not anger. Recognition. As though he had seen this kind of fear before. Not in her, but in the land itself when settlers first came, when promises were made and broken, when the quiet places were no longer quiet. She spoke first, voice small. "I didn't mean to—" He lifted one hand, just enough to stop her. Not sharp, just final. She closed her mouth. Jew leaned forward slightly. The chair creaked under his weight. He studied the jar a long moment, then looked back at her. "You swung," he said, low, rough. "When you had to." Ellie swallowed. Her eyes dropped to her hands. He did not press. Did not need to. The lamp flickered. Wick needed trimming, but neither moved to fix it. Outside, the wind shifted, sharper now, carrying voices from the bunkhouse again. Not clear enough to make out words, clear enough to know they were talking about her, about him, about what had happened in the barn. Joe's jaw tightened once, almost invisible. He had built this ranch to stand apart, to keep the noise of the world at the gate. Now the noise had walked inside, and the crew, men who had ridden for him, trusted his word, were listening to it. Ellie felt it too. The weight of being seen, not as a widow, not as a cook, as a danger, as something that could pull everything down. She started to rise, slow, uncertain. "I can go. Before—" Jew's hand moved again, palm flat on the table, not touching her, just there. She sat. He looked at her a long time. Longer than necessary. In the dim light, his eyes held the dark of high country nights. Deep, unreadable, but not empty. The stove popped again. A coal shifted, sending a faint shower of sparks up the pipe. Outside, the wind dropped for a heartbeat, then rose again. Colder. Through the frost-rimmed window, shapes moved in the yard. Two figures, tall, bundled in heavy coats, walking deliberate through the snow toward the house. Lantern light swung low between them, catching on badges, on the glint of a sheriff's star. Sheriff Hale. Mayor Grimes. They stopped at the porch steps. Hale lifted a gloved hand, knocked once. Hard, official. The sound carried through the walls like a hammer on iron. Ellie's breath caught. She looked at Jew. He did not turn toward the door. He kept his eyes on her, but his fingers curled once, slow, deliberate, into a fist on the table. The knock came again. Louder. The lamp flame steadied, then guttered low. And the night outside waited, patient as stone, for whatever came next. The wind howled down from the high plateau that night, rattling the shutters like fists on a coffin. Snow drove sideways against the windows of Shadowhawk Horse Ranch, white streaks whipping past the glass in furious bursts. Inside the main house, the air stayed thick with wood smoke and the faint metallic tang of lamp oil. Ellie Boone stood in the long hallway, half-peeled potato still clutched in her left hand, small paring knife in her right. She had been working at the counter when the pounding started. Hard, deliberate, the kind that said authority had come calling. Ju strode from the kitchen first, boots echoing on the pine floorboards. His coat was off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, forearms corded from years of rope and rain. He stopped at the heavy oak door, hand resting near the belt knife at his hip. Not drawing it, just there. Habit. Measure. The pounding came again. 3 sharp knocks. Then a voice through the wood. Mayor Grimes, loud and puffed with self-importance. "Open up, Blackbird! We're here on town business!" Ju did not answer right away. He stood motionless, listening to the wind tear at the eaves, to the muffled shuffle of boots on the porch, to the low mutter of Councilman Judd and Pike behind the mayor. Sheriff Hale's voice cut through next, quieter, almost reluctant. "It's the council's order, Joe. Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Ellie stepped forward 1 pace, then stopped. The potato dripped cold water onto the floorboards, drip, drip, steady as a clock counting down. Her knuckles whitened around the knife handle. She looked at Ju's back, broad, unmoving, and felt the hallway shrink around them. Ju reached for the latch, paused. His fingers hovered a long second, calluses catching on the cold iron. Then he lifted the bar and pulled the door open. Cold rushed in like a blade. Snow swirled across the threshold. Mayor Grimes stood foremost, red-faced under his hat, paper clutched in a gloved fist. Sheriff Hale hung back a step, badge glinting dull in the porch lantern. Judd and Pike flanked them, stiff as fence posts. And behind, half in shadow, Vera Kane. Red coat buttoned tight, eyes bright with something close to triumph. Grimes thrust the folded paper forward. "We took a vote. The council's decided. That woman, Ellie Boone, brings moral disorder. She's to leave Willow Creek limits by Friday. No exceptions." The words hung in the doorway like smoke that would not clear. Ellie's breath caught. The potato slipped in her grip. She caught it again, fingers numb. She stared at the paper, at the mayor's flushed face, at the way the wind tugged at his coat, like it wanted to drag him away. Ju did not take the paper. He stood square in the opening, blocking the wind, blocking them. His eyes moved slow, from Grimes to Hale to the councilman, then past them to Vera. She met his gaze without flinching. Her chin lifted a fraction. Hale cleared his throat. "It's unanimous, Joe. You can protest, but they won't hear it, not tonight." Ju's jaw tightened. Just once, a small muscle jumping under the skin. He looked back at Ellie. She stood frozen in the hallway light, knife and potato still in her hands, eyes wide with the old terror of being cast out again. The hallway smelled of peeled starch and lamp wick and the cold that had followed the men inside. He turned back to the porch. Grimes barked. "On what grounds do you stand there? She goes. Tonight or Friday makes no difference." Ju's voice came low, rough as gravel under boot. "She's done nothing." Hale sighed, eyes dropping to his snow-crusted boots. "Rumors, whispers. The vote stands." The wind gusted harder, whipping snow into the house. It dusted Ju's shoulders white. He did not move. Ellie spoke then. Soft, breaking. "I'll pack." Ju turned sharp. His eyes flashed once, dark fire in the dim. "No." She shook her head, tears gathering but not falling. "I can't ruin this for you. They'll turn on the ranch. On you." He stared at her, at the potato in her hand, half-peeled, dripping, absurd in the middle of ruin. Something shifted deep in his chest, quiet but irrevocable. Grimes stepped forward. "Enough talk. She leaves or we—" Joe reached out, grabbed the heavy door, slammed it shut. The bang echoed through the house like a rifle shot. Muffled shouts erupted outside, Grimes cursing, Judd sputtering, Pike pounding again. The door rattled in its frame. Ju set his shoulder against it. Held. Inside, silence fell, sudden and thick. Ellie jumped at the sound. The potato slipped from her fingers, rolled across the floorboards, stopped against the baseboard. She stared at Ju's back, at the way he braced the door, at the snow melting in small, dark pools where it had blown in. He turned slow, looked at her. The shouts outside faded under the wind. Joe stepped forward, one deliberate stride, then another. He stopped in front of her, sank to one knee on the hallway rug, slow, graceful, the motion of a man who had decided something long before the knock came. Ellie's breath shattered. She looked down at him, kneeling, eyes level with hers now, hands open. "Ellie Boone," he said, voice rough with something raw. "Stay with me, as my wife." Her mouth opened. No sound came. Tears tracked hot down her cheeks. She looked at the door, still rattling faintly. Then back at him. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the lamp flame steadied. And the choice, once made, could not be unmade. The door still shuddered in its frame from the slam. Outside, the wind tore at the porch boards, carrying Mayor Grimes's muffled curses and the dull thump of fists against oak. Snow slapped the windows in thick, wet sheets, blurring the lantern light on the porch to a faint yellow smear. Inside the hallway, the lamp on the wall flickered low, wick smoking, throwing unsteady shadows across the pine planks. Ellie Boone stood rooted, the half-peeled potato forgotten in her hand. Water dripped from it in slow, cold drops, plink, plink, onto the floor. The knife trembled in her other fist, blade catching the orange glow. Her breath came shallow, ragged. The shouts outside faded under the howl, but the pressure remained, pressing in like the storm itself. Joe turned from the door. His shoulder stayed braced against the wood a moment longer, as though the house might still need holding shut. Then he stepped away. Slow, deliberate. The floorboards creaked under his weight. He stopped in front of her. Ellie looked up. Eyes wide, wet, searching his face for anger, for regret, for anything she could understand. She found none of those. Only the same steady dark that had met her in the kitchen that first morning, now deeper, heavier with what he had just done. The pounding resumed, harder, angrier. A boot kicked the door once. Grimes's voice cut through again. "You'll regret this, Blackbird. The town won't forget." Joe did not flinch. He sank to one knee, slow, graceful, the motion of a man lowering himself to drink from a stream he knew might be poisoned. The rug under him whispered. His buckskin coat brushed the floor. Ellie's lips parted. No sound came. He looked up at her, not pleading, not demanding, just there, eyes level now, close enough she could see the faint lines at the corners, the way snowflakes still clung to his hair like ash. Ellie Boone, he said, voice low, rough from the cold, and something else. I love you. The words fell plain between them. No flourish, no promise wrapped in poetry. Just truth, spoken once, like naming a trail or a star. Ellie's breath shattered into a small, wet sob. The potato slipped from her fingers, rolled a lazy arc across the floor, stopped against the baseboard. She stared at him, kneeling, hands open, the lamplight carving shadows under his cheekbones. I don't care what this town says, he continued, or what they fear, or what they try to take. His large, calloused hands rose, closed gently over hers, over the knife, over the empty place where the potato had been. He did not take the blade away. He simply held. Warmth seeped through her cold fingers, steady as earth under frost. Stay with me, he said, as my wife. Ellie's knees buckled. She sank too, not graceful, not planned, just down until her forehead rested against his shoulder. The buckskin coat smelled of pine smoke, horse sweat, and the sharp, clean bite of snow. Tears soaked the leather in dark patches. She nodded once, small, frantic, then again, slower. Yes, she whispered. The word cracked. Yes. Outside, the pounding faltered. Voices rose, Grimes shouting about legal proceedings, Hale trying to calm him, Judd and Pike muttering. Vera Kane's voice cut sharp through the rest. He can't do this. The door rattled once more, half-hearted, then fell silent. Boots scraped on the porch. Footsteps retreated into the storm. Inside, the hallway held its breath. Joe did not rise yet. He stayed on one knee, Ellie's forehead against him, her hands still in his. The lamp flame steadied, then guttered again. Snow tapped the window like impatient fingers. Far out in the dark, beyond the corral, a shape stood motionless in the falling white. Old Man Cochise, wrapped in an old wool blanket, face half hidden by shadow, had come down from the ridge when the wind carried the shouts. He watched the house from the tree line, saw the door slam, saw the silhouettes through the window, one tall man kneeling, one small woman folded against him. He did not move closer. He simply stood. Witnessed. The snow thickened around his boots. Wind tugged at the blanket. He lifted one hand, slow, touched the small medicine pouch at his belt. Fingers lingered on the worn leather, on the feather sewn there long ago. Then he turned. Walked back into the trees. Footprints filled almost as soon as they were made. Inside, Ju rose at last, helped Ellie to her feet. She leaned into him, cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath the buckskin. The knife lay forgotten on the floor. The storm raged on, but something had broken open. Quietly, irrevocably, and the land remembered. The small church on the hill stood quiet under a sky scraped clean by the night's storm. Snow lay fresh and unbroken across the roof and the graveyard stones, gleaming white in the pale Friday morning sun. Inside, the air smelled of old pine pews, candle wax, and the faint resin of winter greenery strung along the walls. Reverend Cole waited at the altar, Bible open in his gnarled hands, breath fogging faintly. A handful of settlers had come, decent folk who valued Jews' horses more than town gossip, scattered in the pews, coats still buttoned against the cold that seeped through the cracks. Jew stood at the head of the aisle. He wore the only suit he owned. Black wool, pressed stiff the night before, collar high. His hands rested loose behind his back. He did not pace, did not look toward the doors. He simply waited, eyes on the empty aisle, steady as rock weathered by wind. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Ellie stepped inside. She wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself over 3 sleepless nights, plain cotton, high neck, long sleeves, the hem brushing the tops of her worn boots. In her hands she carried a small bouquet of winter pine and juniper tied with white ribbon. Her face was pale, but her chin lifted as she started down the aisle. The few gathered settlers turned. Some nodded once, quiet. Others looked away. Ju watched her come. The hard lines of his face softened. Just a fraction, just enough that only someone who knew him well would see it. His eyes stayed on her the whole way. She reached the first pew. The doors slammed open behind her. Cold wind howled in, carrying snow that swirled across the threshold. Mayor Grimes strode through first, face purple, paper clutched like a weapon. Councilmen Judd and Pike followed, stiff and red-nosed. Vera Kane came last. Red coat flung over her shoulders, blonde hair wild from the run up the hill, eyes burning. "This wedding cannot proceed," Grimes barked. His voice bounced off the rafters. He pointed at Ellie. "This woman has been legally removed from town limits. She stands here unlawfully. She leaves today." A murmur rippled through the pews, soft, uneasy. Ellie froze. The bouquet trembled in her hands. Pine needles dropped to the floorboards. Ju stepped forward. One measured stride, then another. He placed himself between Ellie and the men at the door. Broad shoulders blocked the wind. His eyes met Grimes's without blinking. "She is not under exile," he said. Low, flat. The words carried like stone, dropped into still water. Grimes waved the paper. "The council voted. It stands." Juh tilted his head, just a fraction. "In 10 minutes, she will be my wife. She will live on my ranch." He paused. "My land sits 5 miles outside your town limits. Your order ends where my property begins." The mayor's jaw dropped. Judd and Pike exchanged glances, panicked, helpless. They had not thought of that. The paper in Grimes's hand shook. Vera pushed forward, voice cracking high. "You can't marry her, Ju. She's deceitful. She'll ruin everything. You can't choose her." Ju looked at her. Not angry. Not pitying. Just final. "I already have," he said. Vera's face crumpled. She spun, too fast. Her boot heel caught the hem of her skirt. She windmilled, arms flailing, and pitched backward. She crashed into the big, decorative holly and pine arrangement near the vestibule. Branches snapped. Dry needles exploded into the air. Pine cones scattered across the floor like spent shot. Vera scrambled up, hair full of sap, coat snagged with holly leaves, face scarlet with humiliation. She let out a small, choked sound, then fled, boots pounding down the aisle, out the doors, leaving a trail of needles and broken pride. Grimes stared after her, then at Ju, then at the paper in his hand. His mouth opened, closed. He turned stiffly, marched out. Judd and Pike followed, heads down, coats flapping in the wind. The doors swung shut behind them. The wind died to a whisper. Silence settled thick in the church. Reverend Cole cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" Ju turned back to Ellie, offered his hand. She took it. Her fingers were cold, but they closed around his without hesitation. They faced the Reverend. The candles flickered steady now. The few settlers leaned forward slightly, some smiling small, some simply watching. Ju's vows came plain. I vow to see you truly, to honor the strength that carried you through grief, to defend you against unkindness, and to stand with you through every winter that comes. Ellie looked up at him. Her voice trembled but held. I vow to love with courage, to build peace beside you, to choose hope even when the world tries to take it away. The Reverend spoke the words. Ju cupped her face, hands rough from reins and ropes but gentle. Their kiss was soft, sure, brief. The church filled with quiet applause, real, not forced, from the handful who had stayed. Outside the doors, old man Cochise stood in the snow. He had followed the path up the hill, blanket wrapped tight. He watched through the crack in the doors, saw the kiss, the applause, the way Ju's shoulders eased for the first time in days. He nodded once, slow, silent, then turned, walked back down the hill into the white. The wind rose again, soft, steady, and the land held its breath, waiting for what came after the vows. The snow fell soft and steady on Christmas Eve, a year to the day since the church doors had slammed shut behind them. Shadowhawk Horse Ranch lay quiet under the white, the corral rails buried to the knees, the barn roof sagging gentle with fresh powder. No wind tonight, just the slow, patient drift that muffled every sound until the world felt wrapped in cotton. Inside the main house, the stove burned low, casting a warm orange glow across the worn floorboards. Ellie sat in the rocker by the hearth, heavy wool blanket draped over her lap, one hand resting on the round swell of her belly. The fire popped now and then, sending sparks up the flue. She rocked slow, back and forth, the motion steady as breathing. Her face held the soft fatigue of late pregnancy, but her eyes were calm, fixed on the flames. The dress she wore was the same cream cotton from the wedding, let out at the seams by her own hands. Ju stood on the porch, coat unbuttoned, collar turned up against the cold that nipped at his neck. He leaned on the rail, arms folded, staring out toward the dark line where the plateau met the sky. Willow Creek lay miles off, too far to see its lights, but close enough that the memory of it lingered like smoke on the wind. The town had not forgiven. Horses still sold, but fewer buyers came. Fewer hands stayed through the winter. Tuck had left in the spring with a quiet nod and no explanation. Others followed. The crew was thin now, 3 men who worked without complaint, but spoke less than they once had. The whispers had not stopped. They carried on the rare trips to town for supplies. The Apache and his Jinx wife. That ranch out past the line. Trouble follows them. Vera Kane had vanished months ago, gone east, some said, or south to Mexico. No one knew for sure. Her absence left a hollow space, like a bad tooth pulled, but the ache still there. Ellie shifted in the rocker. The baby kicked, sharp, insistent. She pressed her palm to the spot, smiled small, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She knew the stories would reach the child one day. Knew the weight of being marked before birth. She had hoped for more, for a place where the past stayed buried. Instead, the past had simply moved in with them. Ju breathed deep. The cold burned his lungs, sharp and clean. He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred from rope burns and winter work. These hands had built the ranch post by post, rail by rail, had held rains through blizzards, had closed around Ellie's that night in the hallway, had kept the door shut against the town. He had won the right to stand here. But winning had cost the quiet he once took for granted. The ranch was still his. It just felt smaller now, more alone. He straightened, pushed off the rail. The porch boards creaked under his boots. He opened the door slow, letting the cold rush in behind him. Ellie looked up. Her face softened at the sight of him. Snow dusting his shoulders, hair dark against the white. He crossed the room without hurry, stopped beside her chair. The firelight played across his face, carving shadows under his eyes. Ellie reached up, took his hand, placed it on her belly. The baby moved again, slow this time, rolling under his palm like a fish turning in deep water. Ju's fingers spread gentle. He felt the small push against his skin. Held still. Let the moment settle. Neither spoke. The stove crackled. The wind stayed quiet outside. Far across the pastures, at the edge of the dark pines, a shape stood motionless. Old Man Cochise, blanket wrapped tight, face shadowed, had come down from the ridge again. He watched the house, the warm light in the window, the two silhouettes inside, one standing, one seated, hands joined over the life between them. He stayed long enough to see Ju's head bow slightly, forehead resting against Ellie's hair for a heartbeat. Long enough to see the way Ellie's shoulders eased. Then he turned. His boots left shallow prints in the snow. The flakes filled them almost at once. He walked into the trees, slow, deliberate, carrying what he had seen. No words, no blessing spoken aloud, just the memory held close, like the small medicine pouch at his belt. Inside, Ju lifted his head, looked toward the window, saw nothing but darkness and falling white. He stayed where he was, hand on Ellie's belly, her hand over his. The fire burned lower. The snow kept falling, and the night stretched on, quiet, heavy, unfinished. The snow fell without wind that night, a slow, silent drift that covered the world in quiet layers. No gust stirred the pines. No owl called from the ridge. The high plateau held its breath, the only sound the faint crunch of flakes settling on frozen ground. Ju walked alone to the edge of the forest, boots sinking ankle-deep in fresh powder. The ranch house lay behind him, small, warm light spilling from the kitchen window like spilled honey across the snow. Ellie sat inside by the stove, blanket drawn over her lap, one hand resting on the swell of her belly. The firelight caught the curve of her cheek, the way she rocked slow, eyes half closed in the glow. She had not asked where he was going. She did not need to. He reached the creek. Ice had sealed it weeks ago, a thick, dark sheet that gleamed dull under the moon. He stopped at the bank, breath clouding white, steady. The cold bit through his coat, sharp against skin, but he did not move to warm himself. He simply stood, listening to the silence that had become the ranch's new companion. The town of Willow Creek had not come closer in the year since the church. Buyers for the horses dwindled. Fewer wagons creaked up the trail. Fewer hands knocked at the gate. The crew had thinned to 2 old men who stayed for the work and the quiet pay, not for talk. Vera Kane's name was no longer spoken, but the shadow she left lingered. Whispers carried on the rare trips to town, eyes averted at the mercantile, the word jinx still floating like smoke that refused to clear. Ju reached into his coat, pulled out a small, smooth stone, black obsidian, worn by years in his pocket. A piece of the old place, carried from the high country where his people had once walked before the lines were drawn. He turned it in his fingers, feeling the weight, the cold edges. No ceremony announced. No words prepared. Just the act itself. Necessary. He crouched at the bank, brushed snow from the ice with a gloved hand. The surface was smooth, unmarred. He set the stone down gentle in the center, pressed once, firm, deliberate. A faint crack sounded, thin, sharp, like bone under pressure. The ice gave just enough. Water welled dark beneath the fracture, slow and black. He stayed there a long moment, head bowed, breath slow. The words he spoke were not loud, not meant for ears beyond the night. I keep the land. I keep the woman. I keep what is mine. Not a vow shouted to the sky, just truth spoken low, to the water, to the stone, to whatever listened in the dark. The crack widened a hair. Water seeped up, touching the stone's edge, then stilled. Joe rose, stood straight, did not look back toward the house. A few paces into the trees, old man Cochise waited, blanket wrapped tight, face half-shadowed by the hood. He had followed the tracks without hurry, without question. He watched Ju place the stone, watched the ice give, watched the man stand afterward, alone, unmoving, snow gathering on his shoulders like quiet weight. Cochise did not speak, did not step closer. He simply looked, long, steady, then turned. His boots left shallow prints in the powder. The flakes filled them almost before he was gone. He walked deeper into the forest, slow, deliberate, carrying the sight with him. No blessing given, no judgment passed, just memory held close, like the feather in his pouch, like the names of the dead carried in silence. Ju remained at the creek. Snow continued to fall, light, relentless. It dusted his hat, his coat, the stone half submerged in the thin break of ice. He did not brush it away. He stood there until the cold seeped deep, until his breath slowed to match the night's rhythm. Then he turned. Not toward the house, not yet. He walked a few steps along the bank, stopped, looked out at the dark where the plateau dropped away, where the town lay hidden miles off. The silence pressed close, no decision spoken aloud, no path chosen in words. But the weight of it stayed, unspoken, unmade, yet already heavier than snow. The flakes kept falling, soft, steady, and the winter waited, patient, endless, for whatever came next. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.